I used to think dreams were the last private place on earth, a sealed room inside the mind, untouched, unobserved, unprofitable. But the night my nightmares leaked online, I learned how wrong I was. They said the spike in viewership was a miracle for the company. Investors laughed like they'd discovered gold or God. Millions watched my subconscious unravel on a live stream, frame by frame, breath by breath, as if my fear was a luxury product waiting to be consumed. People described it as raw, authentic, beautiful. But to me, it felt like a burglary no lock could prevent. I remember sitting in my office, lights dimmed, Berlin rain tapping against the glass, thinking, if they've taken my dreams, what's left of me? And yet, the graph kept rising. The board told me to lean into vulnerability. I told them it wasn't vulnerability, it was trespass. That night, for the first time in years, I dreamt of nothing. A pure, heavy silence, and somehow it felt like rebellion. I don't remember the first dream I ever had, but I remember the first one my company ever stole. It was a test recording, a volunteer, a simple calibration run, that's what we called it. In the footage, a woman is walking through a supermarket that doesn't exist. The aisles bend in on themselves. Price tags are blank. She's searching for her father who died 10 years ago. She keeps turning corners, finding only more corners. No exit, no doors. When she wakes up, she cries and laughs at the same time. "We shouldn't be seeing this," my lead engineer whispered. I agreed, and I bookmarked the file. My name is Julian Keller. I am the founder and CEO of SomnoGraph. Berlin, Mitte District, glass office, clean lines, concrete, and controlled lighting. If you stood in the lobby on any given morning, you'd see productivity, precision, dark jeans, neutral colors, people with badges and headphones and standing desks. You wouldn't see what we were actually doing. You'd just see the packaging. On the wall behind reception, in quiet white letters, bringing clarity to the mind. We started as a medical company. That part is important to me. I repeat it often, as if repetition can wash history. Epilepsy diagnostics, sleep disorders, early detection of neurodegenerative patterns. That's what we told regulators. That's what we told ourselves. I grew up in Stuttgart. My father was an engineer at Bosch. He measured his life in millimeters and error tolerances. At dinner, he would correct the placement of cutlery. Order creates trust, he used to say. My mother was a pianist. She believed in expression. But even her expression had a schedule. Practice at 6, coffee at 7, scales before Chopin. I was built from both of them, the metronome and the blueprint. Emotion, but regulated. Ambition, but justified. At school, I was the boy who corrected the teacher's formulas and then stayed late to clean the whiteboard. By 19, I was writing code that could classify brainwave patterns better than some hospital equipment. People called it talent. I called it survival. Because in our house, mistakes were not just errors. They were breaches of character. When we pitched SomnoGraph to our first investors, I wore my father's watch. Not for sentiment, for structure. "We don't read dreams," I told the room. I made sure to look calm, unthreatening. We read signals. We organize noise. I showed them clean graphs, delta, theta, REM spikes. Our algorithm mapped intensity, continuity disruptions. Think of it as cartography, I said. We map sleep. We turn the unknown into a dashboard. They loved that. Investors love dashboards. Control made visible. None of them asked what happens when you zoom in. The first time I saw a dream rendered as video, it felt wrong. Not illegal, not yet, just indecent. We called it a reconstruction, not a recording. A neural projection rendered through our machine learning model. It filled in the gaps between signals with its own imagination. Half science, half hallucination. But close enough for the human brain to recognize itself. The volunteer watched her own supermarket nightmare and said, "That's exactly how it felt." Felt, not looked. Felt. That word hooked me more than the investor money. We weren't just mapping sleep anymore. We were trespassing into the emotional geometry of a person. Publicly, I was careful. I talked about clinical value, therapeutic potential, the future of trauma treatment. On panels, I used phrases like informed consent and ethical safeguards. I said, "We are not interested in voyeurism. We are interested in healing." People clapped. They always clap for healing. Privately, I monitored the engagement metrics on our early demos. A blurry, sanitized clip of a reconstructed dream on a password-protected page. No faces, no names, just the concept. The click-through rate was obscene. Users would watch the clip 3 times, 4 times. They paused, rewound. They let the unease linger. Something in them recognized the forbidden. If this were a documentary, this is where the narrator would pause and say, "He knew even then." But I didn't know. Not in a way that would stand in court. I sensed, I calculated, I chose. Because beneath every German obsession with order lies a quiet, shaking fear of chaos. And I held in my hands a device that could organize the rawest chaos of all. The unconscious. You don't just turn away from that. Not when your entire life has been about control. People think CEOs love risk. That's not true. We love managed risk. We love risk that bends to our spreadsheets. My board loved me because I made risk look like engineering. Every decision formatted in tidy bullet points. Every ethical concern translated into brand reputation exposure. We had a slide dedicated to privacy. We had a 9-point framework. Each point had sub-bullets. Lawyers smiled. But none of those points contained the word soul. I didn't notice that omission. Or I did and pretended it was poetic, not practical. The first time I tried the device on myself, there was no audience. Just me, alone, in the lab. Late. Everyone else gone. Berlin outside was wet and reflective, traffic lights dissolving on the pavement. Inside, the world narrowed to cables and a chair. I told myself it was for calibration. If I could trust the system with my own mind, I could trust it with others. The technician offered to stay. I said no. Control. Always control. The headset felt colder than I expected. The contact points pressed against my scalp with clinical intimacy. "Record baseline activity," I whispered to no one. Old habit, talking to machines like they're people, and people like they're machines. I lay back. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I invited the company I built to step into the only place I had never shared with anyone. I wish I could tell you that I hesitated, that something in me said, "This is wrong, Julian, stop." But the truth is simpler, uglier. All I felt was anticipation. The same feeling I had as a child when I took apart my father's radio piece by piece, just to see how sound became circuit. The thrill of disassembly. I wanted to see what my mind looked like when it was stripped of performance, of posture, of language. I wanted to see the raw data of me. I told myself it was curiosity, professional integrity, leadership. But underneath all of that, tangled and humming, was something else. A quiet, hungry belief that if I could decode my own dreams, I would finally be immune to them. I thought I was about to conquer the last place that could hurt me. I had no idea that one day, the entire world would be watching that same place, while I sat in the dark, unable to wake up from the consequences. I like to pretend there was a single moment when everything shifted, a clean pivot, a warning, a line I could circle in red. But temptation almost never arrives as a storm. It arrives as a suggestion. And in my case, it arrived dressed as opportunity. The board wanted growth, not healthy growth, not strategic growth. They wanted velocity, the kind that breaks bones. We need a differentiator, they kept saying, a hook, something only SomnoGraph can do. Translation, give us something addictive. One night, after a demo, one of the investors pulled me aside. He had the expression of a man about to confess to a minor sin. "Julian," he said quietly, "you're sitting on a gold mine of emotional content." Emotional content. He said it the same way a butcher might say marbled meat. I felt something tighten in my throat. Disgust, intrigue, both. I should have shut him down. Instead, I asked, "What exactly do you mean?" He smiled like I'd just passed a test. "People don't want clarity," he said. "They want intimacy. They want access to the parts of themselves they're too ashamed to name." He wasn't wrong, and it terrified me that he wasn't wrong. Our next internal prototype changed everything. We added a new layer to the algorithm, a pattern recognition module trained on emotional resonance instead of visual accuracy. Suddenly, the reconstructions weren't just approximate. They were evocative. They felt lived. They felt like secrets. A dream about losing your keys became a dream about losing control. A dream about missing a train became a dream about failing your father. The model was no longer interpreting signals. It was diagnosing vulnerabilities. I should have stopped the project there. I didn't, because deep down, I knew if we could map human fear, we could manipulate it. And if we could manipulate it, we would own the market. That realization didn't scare me enough. The temptation wasn't wealth, not really. I already had more money than I had time to spend. The temptation was power, cold, precise, German-engineered power. The ability to turn the unconscious into something measurable, predictable, controllable. My father would have admired that. My mother would have feared it. Their voices fought quietly inside me, but ambition silenced them with its usual efficiency. The first time a dream reconstruction went viral, it wasn't even supposed to be public. It was a leaked internal clip. 17 seconds, low resolution. A blurry figure running through a hallway that kept stretching, distorting, glitching. The caption read, "Prototype test. No context available." People lost their minds. Forums tore it apart. Artists remixed it. Therapists weighed in. Teenagers claimed they'd had the same dream. Millions of views within a week. My inbox filled with offers. Studios, medical centers, military contacts, entertainment giants. Everyone wanted to own a piece of the unconscious. But there was one email that stood out. A simple line from a major streaming platform executive. If you ever consider making dreams public content, call me first. Public content. Dreams. In the same sentence. I should have felt sick. Instead, I felt chosen. At the next board meeting, the CFO asked me, "What's our upper limit for emotional extraction?" Emotional extraction. He said it like a mining operation. Someone else asked, "Are nightmares more engaging than neutral dreams?" Another, "Can we encourage more vivid content in test subjects?" No one used the word exploitation. No one needed to. It hung in the room like a perfume we'd all agreed to pretend we couldn't smell. And I nodded, answered their questions, outlined a path forward. Because I wanted to impress them. Because I wanted to prove that I wasn't just a scientist. I was a visionary. The kind of man who bends reality and markets simultaneously. I wasn't hungry for money. I was hungry for significance. And significance is a more dangerous addiction than greed will ever be. The turning point came quietly. We discovered that dreams with personal shame performed better on pilot audiences than dreams with fear or joy. Shame had traction. Shame had replay value. Shame stuck. When the data team showed me the engagement spike, I felt something inside me shift. Not break, shift. The realization was brutal. If we wanted to dominate the market, we needed nightmares. We needed vulnerability. We needed pain. We needed the parts of people that were never meant to be seen. For the first time, a sentence formed in the back of my mind that I tried and failed to ignore. What part of me would the world want to see? I didn't know yet, but I would find out, and I would regret finding out. By this point, temptation wasn't a wave, it was gravity. Something pulling me down, slowly, inevitably. And I mistook the fall for momentum. Because ambition has a simple rule. If you don't feed it, it eats you. So I fed it. I greenlit the next phase of testing. I approved a risk model that was more fiction than science. I signed off on a feature that let users bookmark emotionally intense moments. Every decision felt small, harmless, necessary. But together, they formed the perfect slope, and I was already sliding. The last piece of the trap wasn't built by me. It came from someone on the PR team, a casual comment during a late-night strategy session. Imagine the press coverage if you used the device on yourself again. It would show confidence, transparency, leadership. I should have shut that down. I should have laughed or snapped or walked out. Instead, I said the four most dangerous words of my career. Write up the plan. Because deep down, I wanted it. I wanted the attention, the validation, the myth-making. I wanted to be the man who recorded his own mind for the world. I wanted to be unforgettable. And I didn't understand, not yet, that unforgettable and destroyed can sometimes look identical. If Act 2 was the slope, Act 3 was the fall. And I didn't fall quietly. The night before the public demo, Berlin felt unreal, too reflective, too sharp, like a simulation glitching at the edges. I left the office late, the corridors hollow, the fluorescent lights buzzing like insects. My team had gone home hours earlier. They thought I was reviewing the presentation. But what I was actually doing was staring at the access panel to the private server, the one where we stored high-resolution dream reconstructions, the ones that never saw the light of day, the ones that felt too intimate, too raw, too dangerous. I shouldn't have opened the folder, but temptation doesn't negotiate. It waits. A small window popped up. 3 words. Administrator access granted. Inside were thousands of files, anonymous, segmented. But even without names, I knew what I was looking at. People's subconscious laid bare like medical specimens. One file caught my attention. A test subject who dreamt of drowning in a bathtub. Water rising, hands slipping, a voice from the hallway calling her name. She never answered. The algorithm had reconstructed every detail with unnerving precision. The porcelain texture, the echo of dripping water, the sudden shift from fear to resignation. I watched the entire clip, not because I needed to, because I wanted to. And when it ended, I felt something rotten but undeniable. The thrill of power. The thrill of seeing what was never meant to be seen. The next morning, during the public demo, I played the role perfectly. Calm, articulate, disciplined. Every German virtue polished to a shine. We showcased safe, controlled dreams, running through an open field, reuniting with a childhood dog, floating above a city skyline. People applauded. Journalists tweeted. Investors wore the smiles of men imagining future yachts. But beneath my suit, beneath my practiced tone, something was humming. A hunger I no longer recognized as mine. The applause felt thin, predictable, insufficient. Because once you've seen the forbidden, the permitted loses all flavor. 2 weeks later, I broke the rule that started the collapse. I recorded myself again. This time, not in the lab, not in a controlled session, not with clinical detachment. I did it alone, late, half drunk on my own ambition. I told myself it was research, that I needed to understand user experience, that leadership required participation. But privately, the motive was simpler. I wanted to feel something, anything. I wanted the device to strip me open, to show me what I'd been hiding from myself, to prove that I wasn't afraid. Fear disguised as curiosity, the oldest vice in the tech world. The dream started ordinary. A hallway, neutral lighting, the sound of footsteps that weren't mine. Then the reconstruction sharpened. I was standing in my childhood home, the piano room, the clock ticking on the wall, the same one my mother used to sync her metronome with. My brother was there, the younger one, the one who died before I graduated. He didn't speak. He never speaks in these dreams. He just looks at me with that expression, a mix of accusation and longing. In the dream, I tried to reach him. My hand passed through, cold, weightless. Then the piano started playing by itself, a broken melody, off-key, insistent. I woke up sweating, shaking, furious. Not at the dream, at myself, at the device, at how exposed I felt. The next day, I watched the reconstruction, alone, in silence. And that was when I made the worst decision of Act 3. I saved the clip to the wrong directory, a shared directory, a directory with third-party access, a directory that fed our internal analytics system, a directory that was constantly monitored. I didn't realize my mistake until it was too late. 2 days later, the dream leaked. It wasn't supposed to happen. We had firewalls, audits, layers of protection thicker than bank vaults, but none of it mattered, because the threat wasn't external. It was me. The clip spread through the company first, then some anonymous employee, or contractor, or intern, uploaded it to a darknet forum known for rare emotional content. Within hours, it went viral. Not just viral, explosive. People weren't just watching, they were obsessed. They slowed it down, analyzed my posture, debated the symbolism, asked why the piano was out of tune, speculated about my brother. Strangers, thousands of them, turned my grief into entertainment. I should have shut everything down immediately, filed legal orders, killed the servers, destroyed the algorithm. But the board saw the numbers. Traffic skyrocketed.
Press coverage surged. Investors started calling. They used words like breakthrough, paradigm shift, intimacy economy. And then my CFO said the sentence that sealed my descent. "Julian, your nightmares are the best marketing we've ever had." I didn't respond. Couldn't. Wouldn't. Because a part of me, a dark, nauseating part, liked the attention, liked the significance, liked being seen. Temptation isn't just desire. Sometimes it's validation. After the leak, something changed in me. I couldn't focus, couldn't sleep, couldn't tell if people in the office were looking at me or at the man from the viral dream. Berlin's nightlife became my escape. Bars with low lights, rooms where no one asked questions, faces blurred by alcohol and neon, bodies without intimacy, heat without connection. I wasn't seeking pleasure, I was seeking noise, anything to drown out the feeling of being watched even when I was alone. Humans decay slowly, one compromise at a time. I was already halfway gone. The indulgence phase didn't feel like indulgence. It felt like escape disguised as power. It felt like the world had cracked open and I was falling through the gap with no intention of grabbing the edge. Every night I fed the machine. Every morning I pretended to lead a company. Every hour I slipped further from myself. And the worst part? People loved it. They loved the spectacle of my unraveling. They loved the rawness, the tragedy, the voyeurism. They loved the fantasy that they were seeing a soul in real time. The human decay engine was in full motion, and I was no longer the architect. I was the product. Collapse doesn't begin with a crash. It begins with silence, the kind that presses against your skull until you can't tell whether the sound you're hearing is real or just your nerves tearing. After the leak, I walked through the SomnoGraph office like a man moving underwater. Every hallway felt longer, every step felt rehearsed. People stopped to greet me, but their eyes hesitated, just a fraction of a second, caught between respect and curiosity. They weren't looking at Julian Keller, CEO, they were looking at the man from the dream, the man with the dead brother and the broken piano. Nothing changes a workplace dynamic like involuntary intimacy. I tried to ignore it, tried to anchor myself in routine, emails, meetings, KPIs, forecasts, but numbers didn't hold anymore. Spreadsheets blurred, graphs tilted. The world felt unstable, as if every object around me had forgotten its function. I told myself it was exhaustion, but it was consequence, and it was just beginning. The second leak happened a week later. Another reconstruction, one I didn't remember dreaming. A corridor, a locked door, my own voice asking repeatedly, "Are you listening? Are you listening? Are you listening?" The clip spread faster than the first. Within hours, it was dissected on podcasts, reacted to on live streams, picked apart by analysts who called themselves dream interpretation influencers. People argued about what the locked door represented. Some said trauma, some said guilt, some said corporate secrecy. Theories layered over theories until the dream no longer belonged to me. I didn't speak to the press. I didn't answer calls. I didn't sleep. When I closed my eyes, I could hear the dream playing in the distance. Not the memory of it, the actual audio, the actual reconstruction, a kind of phantom echo. The human brain breaks in quiet ways. The board convened an emergency session. They weren't concerned about me. They were concerned about losing momentum, about losing the market lead, about the possibility of regulation. "Julian," the chairman said, his voice polished, "we need you presentable. We need you rested. We need you stable." Then he added almost casually, "Your emotional transparency is a growth asset, but inconsistency is not. A growth asset. My inner life, packaged as a Q4 deliverable." I stared at the table, at the reflection of the overhead lights warping across the glass, and felt something detach in me. A click, a shift, like a mechanical gear falling out of its socket. When I stood up, I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't speak. I walked out of the room and realized halfway down the hallway that my hands were trembling. Collapse isn't loud. It's precise. Sleep became a negotiation. Nights fractured into short, sharp intervals. Dreams blurred with reconstructions. I began to mistrust the boundary between lived experience and algorithmic artifact. One night, I woke to the sound of the out-of-tune piano. I checked every room in my apartment. Empty, still, silent. But the melody continued, soft, wrong, as if the device had followed me home. I tore the place apart, searching for a source. Speakers, phones, vents, nothing. My mind had begun leaking. I returned to the office the next morning, unshaven, unsettled, wearing yesterday's shirt. A junior developer approached me hesitantly. "Sir, are you sleeping?" I opened my mouth to lie, to say yes, to say I was fine, but the truth sat heavy behind my teeth. I didn't know if I was sleeping. I didn't know if I was awake. He showed me something on his tablet, a graph tracking public engagement with my leaked dreams. The line was vertical, not rising, spiking. "People want more," he whispered, not with excitement, with fear. That's the moment I understood. Spectacle is a hunger that grows by consumption.
I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. Emptiness, the first true symptom of collapse. The third leak broke me. This one wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't even dramatic. It was a quiet dream. Me at my childhood home, sitting at the kitchen table, my mother placing a cup of tea in front of me. She smiled. I smiled back. A simple moment. Soft, warm, human. But online, it became a battlefield. People argued about the symbolism of the tea, about the emotional tone, about the sadness in my posture. They slowed the footage down to catch micro-expressions. They debated whether the smile was guilt or longing. They wrote essays diagnosing me. They made memes. They mined my mother's face for clues she never meant to give. This time, I didn't rage. I didn't panic. I didn't drink. I simply shut down. Dissociation, a survival strategy dressed as surrender. In the days that followed, I drifted through life like a spectator. Meetings became static. Emails felt like fiction. My own voice sounded foreign, as if someone else was puppeting it from a distance. I stopped going out, stopped answering calls, stopped pretending. My company continued without me. The machine did not need its architect. That was the real collapse. The moment I realized I had been replaced not by another person, but by an algorithm and a public appetite for watching me come apart. I wasn't a CEO anymore. I wasn't a visionary. I wasn't even a man with a private grief. I was content. And once you become content, you stop being human. The week before everything truly broke, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at the dark circles under my eyes, the unshaved jawline, the thinness of my face. "I don't recognize you," I whispered. And for the first time, the reflection didn't answer. Because collapse is not destruction. Collapse is erasure. I had disappeared from myself. Only the ruins remained. Confession never arrives willingly. It drags itself to you when you're too tired to resist, too hollow to pretend, too broken to maintain the performance. For me, confession began with a glitch. 3 nights after the third leak, the quiet dream with my mother, I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, phone face down, laptop closed, the world muted. I wanted silence. I needed it. But silence, too, had become distorted. It no longer soothed, it pressed. Around 3 a.m., the device on my nightstand, a prototype headset I hadn't touched in days, powered on by itself. The indicator light glowed blue, soft, steady, unmistakably alive. I froze.
No movement, no breath, just the slow pulse of a machine that should not have been awake. A moment later, the built-in speaker crackled. A single sound emerged.
One piano note, out of tune, my mother's piano. And then, nothing. I waited. I listened. The silence around me felt animate, predatory. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, I whispered something I hadn't said in years. Please, stop. I wasn't speaking to the device. I was speaking to myself. The next morning, I boarded a train to Stuttgart. Not for work, not for PR damage control, not for strategy. I went home because my mind was fracturing, and I didn't know where else to go except backward, toward the origin of the man I used to be before ambition rewired the circuitry of my morality. The train ride was quiet, but my thoughts were not. They moved like fragments, flashes of Berlin nights, boardroom demands, my brother's silent face, the cold piano melody looping through the edges of my mind. I felt like a man being escorted by his own ghosts. When I arrived, my parents' house looked smaller than I remembered, as if time had folded it into itself. The curtains were open. The piano room light was on. My mother hadn't touched the piano in years. Arthritis had stiffened her fingers. Seeing the light on felt like a coincidence I couldn't believe in. She opened the door before I knocked. She didn't gasp. She didn't scold. She didn't even look surprised. She simply said, "You look tired, Julian," with a calmness that made something in me break. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table from the leaked dream, the same worn wood, the same tea kettle resting on the counter. And there, in the real world, not the reconstructed one, she made me tea. My hands shook as I held the cup. My mother noticed, but she didn't rush to comfort. She had always believed comfort should be offered slowly, like warm water poured into cold glass. When I finally spoke, the words came out like broken metal. They leaked my dreams. She nodded once, gently. She had seen the news. Everyone had. I expected anger, disappointment, fear. Instead, she asked, "Did you consent to it?" "No," I whispered. "Then why are you blaming yourself?" "Because I had built the machine. Because I had fed it. Because I had become addicted to the attention. Because I had mistaken visibility for worth. Because I had let strangers turn my grief into a spectacle. Because I had replaced discipline with pride, order with chaos, privacy with performance." I didn't speak any of that. Instead, I said, I wanted to control everything. My mother placed her hand over mine, the first physical contact I'd felt in weeks that didn't feel like intrusion. "You cannot control the mind, Julian," she said quietly. "Not your own, not anyone else's." I stared at the steam rising from the tea, its shape shifting, dissolving, reforming. A thought surfaced, one I had avoided for years. My brother's death wasn't something I could organize either, and yet I had spent my entire adult life trying, with algorithms, with order, with ambition, with noise, until the chaos I feared most became the only thing I could see. After tea, I walked to the piano. It was dusty, untuned, silent. I lifted the fallboard, pressed a key. A single note rang out, soft, wrong, exactly like the one in my nightmares. Except this time, it wasn't a machine. It wasn't a leak. It wasn't a hallucination. It was just an old piano and an older memory. And for the first time, I allowed myself to cry. Not the frantic, collapsing kind, the quiet kind, the kind that cleans, the kind that makes confession possible.
Later that night, after my mother had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room and recorded a message on my phone. A confession to the board, to the public, to myself. I talked about the leaks, the ambition, the boundaries I crossed, the privacy I shattered, first mine, then everyone's. I spoke about fear and control and German discipline twisted into obsession. I said the sentence I had avoided for too long. I let the world watch me fall apart because I was afraid no one would look at me otherwise. There was no audience, no applause, no analytics dashboard, just me, a cold room, and the sound of my own breath making space for something I had stopped believing in. Awareness, honesty, stillness, the beginning of return. Redemption is a myth, acceptance is real and quieter. I didn't return to Berlin with a plan, no strategy deck, no crisis roadmap, no clever framing to turn regret into innovation. I returned with one intention: to reclaim the parts of myself I had sold, piece by piece, to the hunger of an audience I mistook for validation.
The morning I walked back into SomnoGraph, the office felt colder than I remembered. Cleaner, as if my absence had made the place more efficient. People watched me, but the looks had changed. Not fascination, not gossip. Something simpler. Caution. I went straight to the server room. Keycard, palm scan, code. A ritual that once made me feel powerful now felt like a funeral rite. Inside, the machines hummed like obedient beasts. Rows of blinking lights, racks of devices that had memorized the worst parts of me. For a moment, I considered mercy. A soft dismantling, a symbolic gesture. But the truth was harsher. This system had grown into something I could no longer bend or excuse or justify. So I shut it down. Not the entire company, not the research, just the public-facing dream feed, the pipeline that turned unconscious pain into visible content. A full stop, a return to boundaries, a reclamation of silence. The servers powered down slowly, one by one, the hum fading into a stillness that felt like exhale. The first real breath I'd taken in months. The board called an emergency meeting, naturally. Their expressions were incredulous, rehearsed, a blend of anger and panic wrapped in corporate politeness. You made this decision unilaterally? Yes. You're jeopardizing billions. Yes. You're walking away from industry dominance. Yes. Their voices rose. Forecasts, shareholders, liabilities, the usual chorus. I waited for the crescendo to pass, then said something I had never said in my entire career. Some things should remain private. Silence. An alien word in a room like this. One of them scoffed. Another shook his head. The CFO muttered something about fiduciary duty. I stood anyway. I'm stepping down. They stared at me as if I had physically torn something from the table. Effective immediately, I added. Not resignation. Release. Not defeat. Departure. No drama, no speeches. Just a man setting down the burden he had mistaken for identity. I expected backlash, expected headlines, expected lawsuits. Instead, the world did what it always does when the spectacle ends. It moved on. My name trended for a day, a half-hearted storm of opinions that dissolved the moment another scandal surfaced elsewhere. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't wounded. I was free. Unknown again, unobserved, unextracted,
a man without an audience. It was terrifying at first. An exposed nerve, a blank stage, a silence too big to sit in. But slowly, like dawn spreading across a city, the quiet stopped feeling like emptiness and started feeling like space. I moved out of Berlin, found a small apartment in Freiburg, near the edge of the Black Forest, where the air is clean enough to make you aware of your own breathing again. I started walking every morning. Just walking. No metrics, no headphones, no dashboards. The first week, I kept expecting someone to recognize me, to ask about the leaks, to dissect the ruins of my career. No one did. People nodded, smiled, passed by. A simple humanity that had nothing to do with extraction or performance felt like recovery. Evenings, I read books, not neuroscience, not engineering, not self-optimization. Fiction, stories that didn't ask me to solve them. And at night, finally, I slept. Dreams came back slowly, soft dreams, strange dreams, some about my brother, some about nothing at all. But the most healing thing was this: I didn't record them, not once. They belonged to me and no one else. In a world that monetizes every corner of human vulnerability, keeping even a single dream unobserved felt like an act of rebellion. Months passed. One evening, while watching the sun collapse behind the tree line, I thought about the arc of my life, the ambition, the unraveling, the spectacle, the silence. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to organize it or explain it or extract meaning from it. Some stories don't need resolution. They need distance. Some wounds don't need redemption. They need time. Some failures aren't collapses. They're consequences that steer you toward a quieter truth. I am not healed. I am not redeemed. But I am here, present, breathing, unseen by choice. And in the soft dark of a Freiburg night, with no devices humming, no audience watching, no algorithm interpreting the shadows behind my eyelids, I dream. And the dreams stay with me, right where they belong.